Hi there and welcome. We're so excited to have you with us today for our live session, The State of Ortho, a data driven look at the first half of 2025. I'm Malika Hofstad Redner, your host for today's webinar, and I'm really looking forward to what's ahead. Today's session is all about context, looking beyond what's happening just inside your practice and understanding how broader market forces and trends are shaping the ortho industry in real time. Today, we're going to be joined by Ryan Moynihan. We're also going to be joined by our two moderators, Audrey White and JC Dean. They're going to be on the back end helping out in the chat and any questions you have. But before we jump in, let's cover a few quick housekeeping notes just to keep things running smoothly. We want you to feel free to say hello in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. We always love seeing who's in the room. Now, if you have any questions as we go, please drop them in the questions tab. You're going to see it in your Livestorm toolbar. That's the best way to make sure your questions get seen and flagged for our Q&A at the end. And yes, this session is being recorded. So if you need to hop off or you want to revisit any part later, the instant replay will be available right after we wrap. And we'll send you the link via email too. Now let's get to the good stuff. I am thrilled to welcome today's speaker, Ryan Moynihan, CEO of Gaidge. Now, Ryan's been leading the charge at Gaidge since 2017, but his background is incredibly well-rounded. He's worked in finance, analytics, marketing, strategy, and operations. I mean, you name it. He's spent more than 2 decades building expertise at companies like Disney, Intel, Ernst& Young, and 3M. And for the past 16 years, he's been laser focused on orthodontics, helping practices grow through smarter data. Today, Ryan is bringing us a real-time look at the first half of 2025, what the numbers are telling us across hundreds of practices, what economic and market shifts we need to be paying attention to, and what that means for your practice as we move into the second half of the year. So Ryan, I'm so glad to see you and so glad to have you. Now let's go ahead and dive in.
Awesome. Thanks, Malika. And thanks everybody for joining today. I know as I looked at the sign up list, we've got folks that are, existing Gaidge users, we have non-Gaidge users, and we also have, our wonderful industry partners as well that are joining in today. So really excited to share what's going on in the orthodontic industry for the first half of the year. We do have a lot of really good news to share. So I'm really excited about that. So welcome everybody, and thanks for spending a little bit of time with us to get an understanding of what's going on. So today's roadmap, pretty simple. We're going to take a look at, what are we seeing with the key performance indicators through the first half of the year. We'll look at it both from an orthodontic perspective, but we'll also look at it from an economic perspective as well, and some of the trends that we're seeing. And then on the back end of this, we're going to dive into some of the critical metrics that help drive profitability in a practice. And we're going to share 3 of the 7 key ones, just in the interest of time, that we look at from a Gaidge standpoint. So we're excited about that at the end of the webinar as well. All right, so when it comes to the data that we're going to be showing today, so I know a lot of you are familiar with Gaidge, but some of you may not be familiar with Gaidge, but Gaidge is going to be the source for the data that we're sharing today in aggregate. So right now we have about 850 practices that are represented on Gaidge, with about 1,300 orthodontists across 2,300 locations. So we have a really robust data set of information, and when we aggregate all that information, it gives us the opportunity to really share what's going on in the industry. But also Gaidge is a tool that a lot of orthodontists obviously use within their practice to really help give them a pulse and a visualization of where they're performing both good and bad within their practice on a daily basis. The information plugs into your practice management system and pulls on a nightly basis and gives you those critical key performance indicators every single day, so you can keep track of your practice and understand exactly where you're at. So it tracks over 80 practice metrics, 35 different reports that are threaded throughout the tool across 9 custom dashboards. In addition to not only seeing the data, you have the opportunity to project. You have custom projections, goals, and budgets. So whether you want to set goals, you want to look at your budget, set a budget, compare to your budget, also project kind of where you're at based on historical performance to where you're going in the future. You also have the opportunity to benchmark yourself against other practices in the industry, and then compare yourself against other like practices as well. In addition to that, we also can pull in your accounting software and be able to show a full kind of P&L view where you're at, not only in the operational side, but also on the accounting side as well, with a spending Pareto. And so we'll get into that a little bit later with what that looks like. So from just a little bit overview, for those of you not familiar with Gaidge, this is kind of the tool that we have out there. In addition to looking at the analytics, Gaidge also has a product called Gaidge Consult Manager. And this product allows you to, when we think about the patient funnel, we're going to talk a lot about that today, from new patient call all the way to the signed contract. This tool allows you to move through that pretty seamlessly. Also having the ability to track and collect that first payment with the patient as well. So another system or solution that we have within the Gaidge bundle. So when we think about Gaidge, I know there's a handful of practice management systems out there. Gaidge does connect with, I would say, the big five. These are them plus OrthoFi as well. So it gives us kind of that 80% market coverage that's out there in the market space. And so at this point, I think Malika is going to launch a poll just to kind of get an understanding for how each one of you in your practice is tracking data.
Yep, we just launched it, Ryan. Everyone should be seeing it. So go ahead and let us know.
Okay, I'll keep going then. All right, so we're going to dive into 2025. As I mentioned, we've got data all the way through June at this point. And so we're really excited to share what we're seeing so far. So if we think about just overall the market of orthodontics, it is rapidly changing. This slide has been adapted just to kind of update it from where it's been in the past to where kind of what we're seeing through the first half of the year. So if you think about it, obviously it's costing us a little bit more to obtain new patients. Residents are coming out with higher debt. We've seen the census on birth rates, lower birth rates, so less kids, which is the primary patient that comes into the practice. But as we start to think about, just different things that have impacted the orthodontic space, not only with orthodontic corporate general dentists and pedo competitors, but we're also seeing now, staffing shortages, wage inflation. We've seen that over the last couple of years, which is obviously putting pressure just from a patient standpoint on healthcare discretionary spend. There is more of a gender shift now to more female orthodontists in the space. And then finally, we're not going to go into a lot of this today, but I just want to put this on the radar that AI is becoming bigger and bigger in the world we live in, and it's something that needs to be adapted and adopted into your practice. So there's many different ways to do that, and I think as we continue to move forward, there's a lot of companies out there right now that are doing a lot around AI. And if you're not taking a look at that, if you haven't adopted some of those tools, I think it's really important for you to incorporate some of that into your practice to become more and more efficient. It's going to be the wave of the future. So if we think about looking at just the dollars that we're chasing in the orthodontic space, if we look at the average American household, they make about $97,500 a year. When you take out the taxes that we all have to pay, we're down to about $72,000. So as you go around the donut here, obviously there's fixed expenses when it comes to housing, transportation, food, insurance, healthcare. We obviously choose what we want to spend on entertainment, but that's an average around 4.7%. So when we think about it at the end of the day, what's left over is about $10,000 that the orthodontists ourselves, we are competing for in our practices. And there's definitely a lot of other things out there that the world is spending their money on. So, but when you think about just average and kind of distill this down to our market that we're looking at, we're competing for that extra $10,000 for that patient to come into our practice and start orthodontic treatment with us. So we got to be really smart with how we do that. And I think there's a lot of tools there that can enable us to kind of cut through and be able to have those patients understand what our services is and how we can offer opportunities for them. So I also like to recommend when we think about the economics, ITR economics. These guys, we've been following them for the better part of about 5 or 6 years now. You can get, just by scanning there, you can get their information pretty quickly. But I think what they do, I'm not really interested all that much. I'm not an economist, sorry. But what they do is really distill the information down and make it super digestible and super easy to understand. So there's a lot of good economic information out there that I think is in bite-sized pieces that makes it really easy to understand. So they publish this on their website every month. And so I like to look at this because these are kind of the leading indicators of how our economy is performing. And there's obviously 4 different sections of our economy: recovery, accelerating growth, slowing growth, and then recession. And so we want to be kind of in that either call it the A, moving up the blue line, or in B, accelerating growth. It's not terrible to be in slowing growth, but we want to try to avoid being in recession. So I guess the good news is that most of the leading indicators are in a decent spot, but we do see non-residential construction and single unit housing kind of in that recessionary, and non-residential potentially looks to be going more towards a hard landing versus that soft landing. So we'll just kind of keep monitoring that. But this is something that's out there. every single month, and it gets updated. And these absolutely help understand or help dictate kind of how our consumer is going to come into our practice. So when we think about, we're going to start breaking down like the top KPIs that we see in the industry and what we've seen in the first half of the year. But if you think about, why should you track key performance indicators? What's the purpose? Obviously, you want to monitor company health. You got to measure progress. How are you moving from A to B? And if you are off track, it helps you make adjustments and stay on track. If you don't have that visibility to that, how are you going to know how your practice is doing? Enables you to solve problems and tackle opportunities, and then looking at that, like I said, trending and those patterns over time. We do a lot of that here at Gaidge, looking at the trends and understanding, kind of what we see in the past is a predictor for what we can potentially see in the future as well. So that is where we're going to dive into. And so when we think about the key performance indicators for the orthodontic space, this is the data through June. We're just going to look at the first half of the year to start. And then we'll take a retrospective look back at prior years and kind of where we think we're going to go in the future here. So the first big one is production and collections, net production versus net collection. When we look at this chart, we want to make sure that that blue bar is above the orange bar. That's always a sign of health in a practice, that you're producing more than you're collecting. That shows growth in the practice. So as we get through the first half of the year, on average, we're about $1.8 million for our overall Gaidge census. That's up 4.5%. So that's something that this industry should really be celebrating right now. We're seeing growth that we haven't seen since back to 2020, back half of 2021. So it's been 3 or 4 years since we've seen growth at this level. We've actually seen a lot of negative growth over the last couple of years. So really excited to see that. Collection is up as well, 3.3%. And then what we like to look at is the net production versus net collection ratio. As I mentioned, you always want production to be above collection, but you want it to be at least 5% to 20% higher than net collection, which would indicate a growing practice. So for the first time as well in a long time, we're seeing that in that range threshold of 6.5%. So we're real excited about that so far. Average contract amount, $5,600, almost $5,700, continuing to take price in this space. So up another 1.8%. I like seeing that. Maybe price can go up a little bit more, but it's good to see what that looks like. And then our average down payment is actually down a little bit, slightly, pretty much flat, but around $815. So that's one of the indicators we're seeing through the first half that may not be as positive as some of the others. So, but all in all, when we look at production collection, our average contract amount, I'm really pleased to see this. I think all of you owning practices, benchmark yourself versus these numbers. Where are you at through the first half of the year? This is really, really positive from comparing to what we've seen over the last couple of years. When we get into our patient funnel, our exams and starts, so far through the year, we're up 4.8%. So those are our leads, our average patient calls. That's really good to see. Now our exams are up as well, but not as much as our leads. So there's going to be an opportunity there that we're going to talk about. And that's that new patient to exam ratio. That's at 77.4%. We want that number to be around 90%. So you can see there's about a 13% gap there from where it should be to where it is. We're going to unpack that a little bit more as we get into looking at all of these numbers holistically to show exactly what the opportunity potentially is for the practice and where you can focus. Our child to adult exams, we're usually a 2/3, 1/3. That hasn't necessarily changed. It might fluctuate a point or two, but for the most part, our child to adult exams come in that range. And then number of starts as well, up 2.3%. So we did see 4.8% on the front end, but we only saw 2.3% of starts. So still positive across the board here with the funnel, but probably some opportunities there as we go forward. And then as far as like the types of starts that we're getting, full treatment has done really well through the first half of the year, up 5.2%. Aligner treatment is still negative year over year, but that negative is improving. And then our same day starts is around 19% in the first part of the year. And then this is a future indicator. So these are our future exams that are on our books. So we want to make sure that we have a healthy pipeline going forward. And that's up 1% year over year as well. So all positive there. So I love seeing all this positivity in the industry. It's the first time I've been able to report on this in the better part of the last 3 years. So this is really exciting. And then we look at treatment efficiency, and we have a metric here called value per visit. And the way you calculate value per visit is that you look at the total value of a contract and you divide it by the number of visits to complete treatment. And so what we're seeing across the different treatment modalities that Gaidge tracks is full treatment, phase 1, phase 2, and aligner treatment. And we're seeing, 310 is the target that we would like to see for value per visit. So with our full treatment, phase 1, phase 2, we're a little bit below that. Above that, obviously, with aligner treatment, less visits there. So that's an area of focus. And so if we look at, combining this across the practice based on the distribution of starts, our average value per visit is around 319. So it is above the threshold from a practice standpoint, and that is up 2.2%. So then that's another positive to report here, because in the past, we've seen value per visits that kind of dropped. So we're starting to move back up positively and getting a little bit better with treatment efficiency. So I'm encouraged to see that. When we look at full treatment, really no difference with visits and months in treatment. Those are flat. And then aligner treatment with visits and month in treatment are flat as well. So, continue to kind of steady there, but overall value per visit with the blend across the practices is up. So that's good to see. So as we put all this together, I know this is a ton of data on this chart, but what I want to bring to your attention is, like I mentioned, this is the first time those metrics up in the far right-hand corner to see net production positive at 4.5, new patient calls at 4.8, new patient exams at 1.4, and new patient starts at 2.3. That is really good for us to see in the space right now. Now, just to give a comparison, we've actually looked back to 2023 to look at the full year and what did we see in 23, and then 24, the full year as well. So as you kind of follow the data down in those columns, you'll see there's a lot of negatives. Whereas when we look at the highlights in the June 2025 USA year-to-date column, there's a lot of positives. And the data we're tracking here is the data I just went through, but what we like to see is net production and net collection. We look at that, like kind of what's the overall business look like from a growth standpoint. And then you get into, what are you charging? What are you getting for your initial down payments? And then we get into the patient funnel from patient call to exam to start. And then we look at conversion rate. How effectively are you converting? So, where the opportunity is here, as I look at June and where we're at, is that obviously strong on net production, net collection, but I think we're not doing as good as we could have done as a function of the patient funnel. So when we think about our new patient calls at 4.8%, those are those strong leads that we have. Those are the patients that have called, they've given us their information. However, our exams are only growing 1.4%. Now, the reason they're only growing 1.4% is because our exam to patient call ratio there, you can see at 77.4, is down 3 points versus prior year. And this is as low aggregately for the US that I've seen this in, I think, ever. So it usually hovers around 79, maybe 78 to 80, 81. So for that to be at 77, we're definitely missing out on opportunities, and you can see it play out there in the exam number of 1.4. The other thing that's negative is adult exams. So with adults, this is going to be a future lifeblood of your practice. We obviously saw through COVID where the adult exam number and adult start number spiked. We did see a little bit of positivity last year with that number, but we're seeing it negative as it is so far this year. That's something that I think each practice needs to focus on. That adult population and being able to bring them in as much as possible to offset the child population to drive growth. They're almost 80% of the population in the U.S., but only a third of the population in your practice. So it's definitely an opportunity for growth in the practice. And then as a function of those patient exams not necessarily being as high from a growth standpoint, our patient starts only ended up at 2.3% as well on that new patient call of 4.8. So we're definitely missing some opportunities in our funnel as a function of that. And so we're going to, as we get into the 3 critical metrics, it's really going to unpack what that looks like and what that should be and how you should, why that matters to your practice and some things that you potentially can do to offset that and improve that. So, but as we cascade through to the patient starts, aligners, like I mentioned, are still down year over year, but that decline is improving. So you can see prior years it's down 8.5 to 5.2 to only 4.4. And then our all other starts, bracket and wires, doing really, really well, up 5.2. And then aligner share of chair, 24.4. This is probably his lowest point in 3 years as well, as far as a percent of aligners that are being done. within your practice as well. And then, case acceptance looking pretty good, conversion rate. And then that far right column, just so you all can compare, Gaidge has about 20 OSOs that we can pull aggregate information on. And so that's the comparison through the first half of the year with the OSO market. So in the past, the OSO market has outperformed the USA market, but so far through the year here, the USA, call it private practice market, has been outperforming what the OSOs have done pretty much across the board there. So I just want to use that as a basis for comparison for everybody. Okay, another way to carve up the data and just to kind of tell the story of what we're seeing this year is, and last year, I like to look back. I mean, we're going to be looking back about 18 months now since the beginning of 2024. So if we think about just net production on a monthly basis, month over month over month, we started off last year, for the first 6 months were negative, and then for the 6 months in the back end were positive. Then if we look at that cumulatively, the last 6 months of the year were positive, and we had less production days last year than we did, in the prior year. So that's, it's good to see that, we started to eke out growth towards the end of the year. And as we moved into 2025, 4 of the first 6 months just individually were positive. And you can see there's some pretty strong growth months there at 11.5 and 9.3. June came off a really strong month. And then if we look at it cumulatively for the year, we're at 4.5 there. And so, if we start thinking about the good story of what we're seeing in orthodontics and what's happening is that, we had 1 less day of production in 2024, and that has an impact, right, on you when you look at production per day. And then we've already had 2 less in 2025. Now that will work itself out as we go through the year, but it's 2 so far. And we did have a leap year last year. That's why February is down a day. But that day that we're lost in May will get picked up somewhere, probably in the summer here in the next month or 2. But so far, so good, seeing 4.5% growth. And then if you look at it cumulatively, 11 of the last 12 months have had positive results. So that's something we haven't seen, obviously, in 3 years as well. So that's really, really cool to see. So I'm really encouraged about that. These charts here, I like to look at 12-month rolling averages, just to kind of give us a picture for where the industry has come from over the last 18 months, because we've seen a lot of great progress. So, okay, if we look at just 2024 by itself for net production, it grew 1%. Net collection grew 0.1%, pretty flat. So far, we've talked about it, 4.5 on the production and 3.3 on the collection. But if we think about a rolling 12, right, we want to look at rolling 12 because takes out the seasonality. Every single month we're looking at, okay, what happened the past 12 months? What happened the past 12 months? What happened the past 12 months? So, what I'm encouraged to see here is with net production, you can see at the beginning of 2024, it was around 3.4 million. And now as we move into the middle of 2025, we're well above 3.5, maybe 3.55 million, somewhere in that range. Our net production to net collection ratio back in 2024 to begin was only 2.7. We know that's not healthy. We want that to be between 5 and 20. But rolling 12 is 4.2. So we're still not in the healthy range rolling 12. We know we're in the healthy range for the first 6 months, not rolling 12, but that's still progress that's being made. And then if we look at, 12-month rolling new net production growth, 4%, really positive. 12-month rolling net collection growth, 2.5%, really positive. So you can just see those trajectories are making really nice strides as we've moved, into 2025. So really encouraged to see that. And then when we look at our patient funnel, same thing. We're looking at 12-month rolling right now. These are pretty flat lines. There's not a lot of delineation there as far as our funnel, but there is some gold within this. So if we think about our exam to new patient call ratio, now remember, this is not a first 6 months. This is 12-month rolling. So it didn't drop down to 77. It's 79.7 to 81.6. That's the range. And then our conversion rates have kind of been pretty steady within that 68 to 71% range. We look at, what we're seeing in new patient calls up 4.8, only exams 1.4, and starts 2.3. But when we look at it over 18 months, over 12-month rolling, we're seeing 2.6 new patient calls. Our exams are still, low, and then our starts are 1.1. So Making progress. Obviously, the first 6 months progress of this year is better than the last 12-month rolling. But overall, we're starting to trend in the right direction consistently across the funnel, with our exams being the weakest part of the funnel. That I think there's, as we get into these 3 key metrics, it's going to be an opportunity for us to improve that for our practice going through the back half of the year. And then I'll finish just the kind of the industry overview on this slide. And then after this slide, Malika will launch another poll. But what we look at here, this is an economic model, and it's a rates of change model. So what you want to compare, what we're comparing here is we're comparing net production. And we're looking at the blue line represents a 3-month rolling % change. And we've looked back all the way about 7 years back to 2018 on this. And then the orange line is a 12-month rolling % change of net production. And so as an economist, if you're looking at this, what it's telling you is the blue line, you want that 3-month rolling number to be above the orange line. That's an indicator of positivity and growth. And so if we analyze this chart, if I go back to pre-COVID, you can see that the industry grew within a very narrow range, kind of that 0 to 5%. There wasn't a lot of fluctuation. It was pretty stagnant or standard between those control bars. Then we hit COVID, right? We have our shutdown, then we spike up. We see growth in the industry that we haven't seen before, 20-25%, lasts for about 12 months. And then it really comes crashing down as well. And we've been kind of battling out of that since the better part of back half of 21 and into 22. But I'm really encouraged, though, as we finished up June of 25, if you take a look at this, we're actually almost back to where we were pre-COVID. And this is the first time we can consistently say that over, call it a 6 to 9, 10-month period. And then if we're looking at, we have 12 straight months that the 3-month rolling is positive. It's really good. And we have 9 straight months that the 12-month rolling is positive. So for me, as I'm not an economist, but reading this chart as if I was an economist, this is a really positive indicator for the industry that will continue that growth through the rest of the year, hopefully. And obviously, we're in the heat of summer right now. It's a busy time for a lot of the practices. So if you're all able to maximize that and get through the summer in a good way, I think it's going to really set up to finish the year really, really strong. Still compound annual growth rate. We've seen a lot of, up and down. It's only 1.6, but that's over a big 6-year period. There's a big COVID swing in that as well, or post-COVID swing in that. But overall, very, very encouraged about the numbers that we're seeing in the industry. So with that, I think Malika is going to launch a poll, and I'll take a little break here while that gets launched, and we'll dive into the critical metrics.
Yep, poll has been launched. We want to know what's your biggest challenge when it comes to growing your practice. So make sure to let us know.
Great. All right. So as we finish up, we're going to look at 3 critical metrics to drive profitability. So within Gaidge, we've done a lot of regression analysis to understand if you think about your practice and you think about, okay, profit per day, right? We started to distill that down to like what drives profit per day. We put that through, we've looked at a ton of different indicators, went from the accounting side to the operational side to the staffing side. And then we've thrown that all into a big regression analysis, and you turn it up and you look at what's statistically significant and what pings against each other. And these 7 metrics, continue to come out of the model year after year after year. It's not rocket science either. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but just to understand each one of these, like, why is it important? And then, if yours is off within your practice, what can you do to turn that around? So when we think about, the metrics that we're going to look at today, like I said, there's 7, but we're going to focus on 3, and it's going to be the exam to new patient add ratio. It's going to be observation starts, and it's going to be conversion rate. So we're really going to unpack the funnel. And, as we saw in the industry data leading up to this, we've got some really good growth in the funnel, but we're not maximizing the opportunity fully throughout the funnel. So that's where I want to unpack that and look at that today. So our first one is going to be the exam to conversion rate. So we talked about that. That was the one that was at 77.4%, down 3 points. So if you think about your funnel, you have new patients that are added, and then a fraction of them come in for exams. We want 90% of those to come in. right? We're seeing 77.4. So we have an opportunity there to improve that, right? So why does this matter to the practice? This is your revenue pipeline. If you think about those new patients added, those are your marketing leads. Your marketing has done a nice job growing 4.6, 4.8%, putting those leads into your practice. How do you convert them into that first step of the conversion process, which is getting them in for an exam where you can start to get an at-bat, build a relationship, and hopefully get them converted as you need. So it does improve your marketing ROI, obviously. Remember, those are leads. If you're only at 77.4%, your marketing ROI goes down because you don't have those at-bats. And then this is the leading indicator to practice growth. So in any business, front end of the funnel, if you can get your patients in or you get leads in, that gives you that opportunity to really do something to drive revenue in a business, in a practice. So it's definitely really, really important. This is probably one of the more key indicators that you should be looking at in your practice. And so I ask you, if you don't have Gaidge, if you're looking at this yourself, like what is your exam conversion rate from your new patients added? Everyone should be taking a look at that and understanding that. So as we look at the funnel, we're going to start to break this down over the next 3 metrics, but this is the front end of it. As I mentioned, new patient calls to exams. And this is the data for the aggregate Gaidge database through the first 6 months of the year. It's actually a rolling 12 because I like to make sure that I'm looking at the rolling 12. So there's 868 new patient calls, and then there's 685 exams that have come through. And so right now, if we were to look at that, we want that to be at 90%. We would have 781 if we were at target. The fact that we're not at target means that there's an opportunity there. If we look at a leaky bucket, we basically would say if we had 781, some of those would go to observation, some of those would go to case conversion or not be converted through case conversion. So that's where that 268, 800 comes from. So this is a huge number, right? And I go back to what is your exam conversion rate and what is your leaky bucket at your practice? I've looked at a lot of these practices over the years, and always this front end of the funnel is a huge opportunity. And there's always hundreds of thousands of dollars that are being missed in the front end of this. So definitely worth looking at from your practice standpoint. So, we saw a $200,000 plus leaky bucket. What can we do if it is below 90%? Like, what does that look like? Front desk, call center training. I was just on a podcast where we saw, I think, Scott Hansen with Lead Sigma. There's a solution there just to make sure that you don't miss calls. There's, I think it was 17 or 27% of calls are missed, whether it's during lunch, before hours, after hours. There's a whole, like I mentioned, AI. I'm not going to go into AI, but that's a whole solution there that makes sure that, you can capture those patients so they don't go to another practice. And then also too, how is the phone being answered? If there's 3 or 4 people answering the phone, is there inconsistencies there? Do you put a dedicated resource on that's just basically a new patient coordinator and make sure that you drive that number and that's their sole purpose? Got to look at that for your practice. Schedule flexibility. There's no badge of honor saying that I'm booked out 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks for exams. A lot of times people want it now and they may move on. So definitely have to look at, opening up more schedule spots if you're not getting the exams or you're getting the no-shows, or not the no-shows, but they're falling off the list with your conversion rate. And then, follow-up system for unbooked calls, that booking window. I know OrthoFi talks a lot about the booking window, and the longer you go until that exam is booked, the less chance they have to convert. So it's all about, instant gratification and getting them in as fast as possible. So if this is a problem for your practice, these are a couple things potentially you could look at as well. Second area that we're going to look at today, the second metric, is going to be around our observation program. And so, the target is to have 25% of your starts come from your observation. So if you think about this is pretty low-hanging fruit. This is an opportunity for your patient, for patients you've already created a relationship with. They've come in for an exam. They're in a holding pattern, for you to kind of pull them out at the right orthodontic age and pull them into your practice. So it should be, a quick way for you to get revenue and production in your practice. So why it matters, future starts, steady pipeline. I talked about that. You've already built that relationship. So this enables it, orthodontics is all about relationships. So how do you continue to build that with loyalty? Improves clinical outcomes because you're treating them when they're ready at the right time. And then obviously having that relationship is going to only boost your word of mouth. And if you have a good program to create that relationship, it's going to pay dividends. So you think about, you have your initial observation, you have 6 to 9 month recalls, you're treatment ready, and then you're in active treatment. So why this is a challenge in the practices. So this is data from June 25. Instead of 25% of our starts coming from observation, only 18% are coming from observation. So there's a 7% gap there of opportunity potentially that you potentially could see. And then we want to see about 10% every month. We're only seeing 9, but what I will say is that is an improvement over the past. And I'm actually, even though the numbers aren't at target, but we've seen improvement in the space through the first 6 months, which I'm going to walk you through here in just a second. So we go back to our funnel. We talked about the front end here. And then our next piece is pre-treatment observation. So as we start to build up our starts for the back end there, that far bar chart will be our total starts as we get there. We want that to be 25% of starts. So right now, through June, it's at 87. If it was 25%, it would be 109. So that represents another leaky bucket of about $110,000 just in your observation pool alone. So this is a chart out of Gaidge. And I like this chart a lot because it has an age stamp on all of your observation patients. So whatever age they are, they hit this stacked bar chart based on where they're at. So when I look at this number, on average across the US, there's 394 average observation patients in a practice, of which 54% of them are already 11 years or older. So to me, that's an opportunity to go tap into each one of those patients and understand if they are ready to start orthodontic treatment being 11 years. The good news is that 9% of them were seen in June, 10% is the target. This number has been like 7%, I think, as we ended up last year. So we're actually improving it. We're seeing more of our observation patients, which is really good news. And then 24% of them haven't even been seen in 12 months. So this number was 33% or 31% last year. So we've had a 7% improvement. So you're actually starting to see those patients, more frequently, which is great. So key message here, take a look at this for your practice. How many do you have in observation? What are their age ranges? And are we talking to those folks that are maybe of orthodontic age? So observation, why does this, or here's your action items. If you're below 25%, do you have somebody, you hire an observation coordinator, or do you make it someone's additional focus or main focus to go mine that observation pool and pull those appropriate patients into your practice at the appropriate time? Are you actively engaged with the 11-plus-year-old obs patients? And then are you seeing them on a regular routine basis? So we're seeing that, still a quarter of our patients haven't been seen in 12 months. So that absolutely can be cleaned up within a practice. So definitely observation opportunities here within observation for sure. And then our final one that we're going to talk about today, before we do the wrap up, is conversion rate. And so when we think about the target, we want that to be about 70%. So we saw it was 69 through the first part of the year. It's a little bit below where we could be, but not terrible. When we look at that, it's total starts minus phase 2 divided by total exams. Why does this matter? If you're, this measures obviously case acceptance performance. It's how good is your practice in converting new starts. It does highlight your front desk and TC effectiveness. So how effective is your sales process in your practice at the different levels to get that patient into the practice and into treatment. Marketing ROI is absolutely driven as a function of this. Every practice for the most part is probably spending something on marketing. And so you want to maximize those dollars that you're spending. And then it also helps forecast starts more accurately. So if you think about your practice as a manufacturing facility, what goes in comes out. If we know on average we're around 70%, we get this many calls. Okay, on average, we know we're going to do this X number of starts, per day, per month. It helps us, with our capacity planning, staffing, things like that, which is going to help, drive profitability. This will also identify process gaps, red flags, and then where you find those flags or gaps, you can do targeted coaching and training. So it's really good to make sure that this is fully understood. So when we finish up our sales funnel here, we've got the front end with new patient calls, exams, our pre-treatment obs. Then we have, as we work the back end of our funnel, there are going to be some folks that do start from the exam. And then we have our pending folks as well that are going to start. So that gives us a total of 437 total starts. If we were at 70%, we would be at 479, which gives us another leaky bucket, of around $210,000. So, and some of these buckets overlap, just so they're not all mutually exclusive. If you don't, if you help out some of your obs patients, then that total start number would go up, that leaky bucket would go down. But overall, just in general, but regardless, there's a lot of dollars here that are lost in a patient funnel within an orthodontic practice. And I think, if there's one thing that you all can look at, it's really understanding this process and making sure you have systems and processes around this to be super tight on this. And then, so what can you do if you're below 70%? Auditing the new patient experience, how are folks seeing your practice? What does that look like? How do you move them through your funnel? Do you have to refine the consultation process? There's a lot of talk around financial flexibility and the choice programs. The default rate in orthodontics is super, super low. I think it's 2%, 3%. So can you provide that financial flexibility? Because ultimately you will collect that cash 97, 98% of the time. Align marketing with patient expectations. So, what is your brand message? And then when the patient comes in, does that fit the message? Train and align the team. Obviously that goes without saying. And then obviously I think it's really good to monitor, measure, and adapt. So having the ability to track the metric, understand it, measure it, and then, if it's off target, being able to adapt, doing some of the things above, I think is really, really important. So as we wrap up, we've got 2 more slides here. I wanted to give you all kind of a self-diagnosis practice aid. So if you think about what we've talked about today, we have our exam to call conversion is 90% target. Our observation starts at 25% of total starts. And then our exam to start conversion is around 70%. We did not talk about the 4 or 5 that are left over. I guess there's 8 of them, not 7. But we'll get into that in future webinars. But just to give you kinds of, I think if you were to measure and manage to these critical KPIs within your practice, you'd be doing really, really well, really well. So as we kind of take away from what we've seen in the first half of 2025, our exam to call ratio, as I mentioned, all-time low, 77%. That should be an opportunity that everybody should be looking at within your practice. We are wasting valuable leads. We have less at bats. That is impacting net production and also our starts. So we saw net production, although albeit healthy at 4.6, 4.8, it could be well over 5, 6 if we had a better exam to call ratio. Schedule flexibility. Want to make sure you're getting those exams in, prioritizing that. That's be maniacal about that. Adult patients, those are a key to future growth. We're seeing still them kind of hover around that 0 to negative. We want to make sure that those are that becomes a positive aspect for your practice. Observation's been mixed. So good news is we've seen improvements with patients seen and frequency. However, we need to focus on the 11 plus bucket. Still 54% of those are residing in that bucket. Probably some low hanging fruit in there. And then only 18% of starts versus the 25% target. So that could definitely be improved. Financial flexibility to drive conversion. We talked about that on the last slide. We want to continue to focus on additional services. So one of the reasons I think production is higher than maybe our starts growth or our call it exam growth is additional services. So obviously we're taking price. That's about 1.8%. You've got your growth still in your starts, but there's certain services like retainer programs that absolutely can really help the bottom line as well and be a service for your patient as well. So be thinking about those. Digital footprint. So we did not get a lot. We did not get into treatment efficiency today, but we will in future webinars. And that's an opportunity to become more profitable and more efficient within your practice. And then, I'll leave you with this is kind of how is AI going to impact your practice? What are you doing? What steps are you taking? How are you starting to learn about that? Even if you're a novice on it now, it's probably smart to start learning what that potentially can do. And I think there's a lot floating around right now in the orthodontic industry that's starting to educate on that pretty deeply. So pretty excited to see how that's going to transform the practice. And so as a function of attending this webinar, and I think JC will put a link in the chat right now, so take a look at that. We do have a promotion today that if you're interested in Gaidge, there's a $500 onboarding special, basically a $1,495 discount to get started with us. And like I said, JC has a link in the chat. You can click that and get signed up with a demo with her and the team, and we'll go from there. So I think we're at the end right now. Thanks everybody for attending. I don't know if there's any questions that came into the chat.
There are.
Oh, there are. Cool.
Yeah. So let's get into this first question, Ryan. It says, are you seeing any regions that are running counter to this national trend? For instance, what are the numbers looking like in the DC region? And someone kind of piggybacked off that. They said, we are in Southern California, would like to know the trends in our state.
Okay. I don't know them off the top of my head. I can look them up pretty quickly. So if we can capture who asked that question, I can definitely get back to them, because if you're a Gaidge user, if whoever asked the question, you can actually go in and benchmark the AAO region that you're in. So I think PCSO on the West Coast for California, and then what is it? Mid-Atlantic, maybe in DC.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll definitely go look that up. I just don't have those off the top of my head. It's really easy to look up and see what that performance looks like, and we can definitely follow up with you on that.
Okay. Someone asked, why do you subtract phase 2 starts from total starts for conversion rate?
So they don't get counted twice, because
Awesome.
they're counted the first time in phase 1.
Okay. And this is the last question that I think we have. It says, how does the call ratio to exam come over, especially when there may be different promos out there?
The way it's calculated is when you're a new patient add, that means they've taken your information, right? So your name, address, all that kind of stuff, put you into their practice management system. And then, so therefore you are considered a patient. And then it looks at, how many of those patients that were added to the practice management system came in for an exam. So that's how that metric is put in place. So if you're adding patients that maybe you had at a community event or something that didn't really call you with intent, that could skew the number a little bit. But I think for each practice, it just depends on, how you're actually intaking a patient, and, what's their intention to come in versus, maybe just adding a bunch of patients as a function of a community event. I've seen that in the past too, where it can skew the number.
Okay. Someone asked, what sample size was used for the industry assessment?
We have about 850 to 900 practices, 1,300 orthodontists, and 2,300 locations.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, I think that's our last question that I see in the questions tab. So we want to say that thank you so much to Ryan. That was such an in-depth and insightful breakdown. And we want to thank you all for joining us live today. Now, just a quick recap, you're going to receive that replay link shortly via email. So please feel free to share it with your team or revisit any part of today's discussion. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question, or you want to connect with us after, just reply to that email and we'll make sure to follow up with you directly. So on behalf of all of us here today, thank you so much for being with us, and we hope you all have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.